So here we are in orange. Now we have a task for 2 hours to try to think about and talk about how we make films in a modern world. And ironically, here we are in a classic modern environment with lots of distractions. So you can drink coffee, you can text, you can go on your iPad, you can do everything simultaneously. People will come in the room, people will leave the room. So this is very modern. Can you imagine having a masterclass in this environment even 10 years ago? I can't. In America now, in Apple shops, we're doing the same thing, where people walk around as presentations are given. Why do I bring this up? Because in a modern world, we're dealing with constant distraction. And we're actually becoming experts at multitasking. Do you all recognize that? How many of you go on your computer, maybe Skype, while you're emailing and texting simultaneously, right? These are really important skills to have. I'm not negating the concept of multitasking. To function in a modern world, we have to be good at doing things simultaneously. And there are certain aspects of filmmaking where you also need those skills very heavily, by the way. I produce and direct, so let me tell you, as a fundraiser, I'm multitasking all the time. But what we want to talk about here isn't that. We want to talk about how do we make films and the art and craft of making films. And that requires a different skill or different skills than the skill of being distracted. So I'd like to take a moment and just talk about the skills it takes to make films and what we're doing as filmmakers. I was recently in Bern, Switzerland, showing a retrospective of my work. And I came across this amazing poster. I wrote it out here. It said, "Art comes from need." You guys, come on in. You're welcome even to sit on the floor. Yeah. Art comes from need. Let's just talk about this for a minute. Why do we need to make films, and why do we need to watch films? This is an interactive discussion, so I'd love you guys to talk to me. Why? Why make films? To express. We want to share a vision, maybe a unique vision. I think implied in that is something unique. We have something unique that we see. What else?
Emotion.
Emotion.
Yeah.
Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, we need to tell the other people what our emotions
Take the mic.
are.
Not to tell, to show.
So,
Because in movies
I
you
believe
don't tell,
that
you show.
one of the reasons we are trying to do movies is that we need to show the other people what our emotions are, because we consider them as very important for us and for the other ones.
To show emotion, yeah.
To show, yeah.
Did somebody said?
Yeah, I just that first he says to tell emotions, no, to show
To
emotions.
show emotion. But I think actually first he said to share. Did you?
To show and to share.
To share.
Because
I
we believe that our emotions are the same as the other.
Right. I remember when I was about 7 years old, I'm 52 now, so that would be 1967. We went to the movies for my aunt's birthday. In 1967, you still wore gloves when you went to the movies. Gloves, dresses, high heel shoes, the whole bit.
Excuse me, it should be 77.
No, I was born in 59. Sorry. So, we went to the movies Big Deal and we saw a very old film called Funny Girl with Barbara Streisand. Now, yeah, very old. And I remember thinking to myself, I was so moved by the emotion of it. I remember thinking to myself, oh, I want to make people feel that much. I want to make people feel what I just felt, or feel, because we express through feelings. And through feelings, what are we doing? Connecting. We're connecting, what else?
Transformation, making a change.
Transformation, right. People are able to transform. Through an emotion, we are transforming. And I don't know about you, but for me, there is nothing more emotional than film. Visual, because it's such a complex art. It's using music, words, visuals. I think it's engaging our senses so three-dimensionally that we have, I think, the strongest potential emotion. Some people would argue theater also, of course, or music, but I think film is sort of the most complex art on that. So art, we need art for a lot of reasons. I would say also that we need art to make sense of the chaos. Our world is incredibly confusing, and art is the way we make sense of this confusion. We extract, we simplify, we identify, and we try to make sense of the madness. Maybe today it is more chaotic than ever before, but maybe in the 14th century, when there was no antibiotics, when there was widespread plague, when there was endless wars, maybe it was more chaotic, maybe we're confused. But in any sense, art makes sense of the chaos, and it's why since the cavemen, people have struggled to tell stories and express themselves through art. This is not a new thing. Film is a slightly more, I would say it's using modern technology, but the need for film is very old. So, as we talk here, I want to just keep going, and I want us to, this is where, can I have a hand? Yeah, just turn my little paper, thank you. I'd like us to get stupid together and see things fresh. Why? I mean, getting stupid is a buzzword, but why would one want to get stupid? One wants to get stupid because you each arrived here at 21 years old, 52 years old, 30, whatever age, with a whole lot of experience. And all that experience is a good thing, but it also makes you a little immune to reality. Because I'm coming here with my judgments. You look at me, for example, you see a woman with a relatively big nose, curly dark hair, a certain kind of dress, boots, whatever, and you make a judgment, right? Labels. You label me. That's okay. We're doing this because we have to make decisions quickly. And that label that you're giving me, or I'm giving you, or anybody in this room, is the summation of all the years of experience you've had on the planet. We're like a vast computer, and we make a decision. What kind of decisions do you make about me, for example, with my dark curly hair, my big nose? Where am I from, other than my voice? What's my background? What class am I in? Let's talk about that for a minute. What decisions do you make about me? Yeah.
Well, there's Jewish heritage.
Jewish. Immediately, she's Jewish. Okay.
Sorry, I don't know anything about you. That I think is stupid, but I think that it's stupid. I think that's the kind of stupidity that you are talking about.
Good.
Okay. Well, I don't know if it's on.
So we just had another label, okay?
So,
It,
but
it's stupid.
yeah.
Go ahead.
All I want to say is that being stupid gives us the opportunity to play. And I think it's very important for us to play.
That's a great point. Great. And just to continue the metaphor though, of course you can't unlearn, but it is a practice, a skill to try to be aware of your judgments and to drop them. This is a skill that can be trained. Most of us run on automatic. She's Jewish. She's middle class. She's upper class. Well, her boots probably cost about $300. She's around 30. She's around 40. She's American. Oh, if she's American, she must have those weird American politics. And we're running on automatic. So it's a skill to become aware of the mind and for a moment say, okay, I drop it. Or I make an attempt to drop it before the next opinion comes. These are skills that I'm very happy you're bringing up because I want you to become aware when you leave here what your mind is doing in every circumstance and work to build the skill of dropping it and coming and building this thing called beginner's mind. It's a very important skill for documentary work, and the question always is why? Why? What skills are we needing to make documentaries? Let's just throw out a few of those things. One skill we just said, which is being stupid, yeah.
Another, love people.
You need to love people.
Love people because you want to tell them something and tell them about.
What other skills? Yeah.
You should be very curious.
Curious. Very curious. I have to say that curiosity is something that often jumps over the preconceived mind. Yes, she's X, but maybe there's something beyond that. And that curiosity drives you beyond your first thought, your first judgment. I want to make a very clear point. There's nothing bad with all those skills you've built for your 20, 30, 40, 50 years. They are really good things. They're just one set of skills. They're not everything. And I'm asking you to work a little outside the toolbox, or to build a toolbox, so to speak. What else? Some people in the back of the room, just because you're back there doesn't mean you can hide. What do you think?
Research or attitude?
Yeah, back there, by the bar.
What about action sequences in movies?
What about what?
Action sequences in movies. What about action sequences in movies? And instead of just having dialogue and it's not. Excuse me.
Action sequences,
Yeah.
I got it. Action sequences, when we talk about film, we're talking about dialogue, we're talking about visuals, we're talking about action. T, was there something here? Yes.
I think we also have a sense of lacking something. Something is bothering us or something is hurting us. Or,
Yeah. The skill that you have a lack, I think that's really interesting. A bother or, again, a need. People often ask me, a lot of my work goes on for years. My most recent film was shot over 20 years. And they say, yes, it's older than some of you. They say, how did you do that? And I think, who said that? You did, yeah. This thing of a need or a lack propels you forward until you've satisfied that need or lack. Sometimes it's a responsibility.
it's a response to the reality.
Yes, a response to the reality. What else?
Patience and acceptance.
Patience. Okay. You can imagine shooting a film for 20 years takes a little bit of patience. But generally,
Did you plan it to be like this?
no. I never would have started it if I planned it. Generally, though, people who make documentaries have more patience than fiction filmmakers because generally we're working with time and reality and with less overt control. Patience, there was another word that you threw out, sorry. Patience and acceptance. What other skills?
You need humility, but also combined with confidence.
Yeah, that's a good one. Humility combined with confidence. We have to accept that in order to make films, you need tremendous ego. Meaning when you find something, you need to hook onto it and say, I think I'm right. Why? Because most of the time the world will tell you you're wrong. Most of the time everybody will say, what a stupid idea you have. Or why ever would you want to film somebody for 20 years? Or who cares about a spiritual master and his son? And on and on and on. The world will always tell you you're wrong. So you need a certain amount of ego, but you also need humility. And that combination is a very weird combination. How can you believe so strongly yet be open to seeing what happens and reacting to it? What about some of the hard skills? There's some more skills we need. We need visual skills, aesthetic skills. One thing I didn't say is I can't spell, even though this is my language. So I'll just tell you that right off the bat. I don't think that's the way you spell aesthetics, but I'm not quite sure. What about musicality? You need to have a sense of music and rhythm. Rhythm is not just, same for this, rhythm and musicality is not just about music, but it's about the pace and movement of something. The man in the back said, what about action sequences? When we look into what bits of information we're using, we're dealing a lot with rhythm, with pace. And that has a lot to do with musicality. What other hard skills might we need?
Research or determination?
Research skills, right. I am sure all of you sitting here have arrived here with years of work on discipline. That's what school is about. That's what your parents are teaching you. That's what every little thing you succeed at is about. How do I have discipline? Everything you fail at is also, okay, here's another word I can't spell. Everything you fail at is also about learning discipline. Discipline is really important. What I want to say with this list, which we could go on forever, is that films take such a complex level of skills that I guarantee you, at least in my lifetime, I will never succeed at all of them. We are all working in an environment of a laboratory. I have now been making films for 32 years. I am still at the beginning of my career. Because every time I meet reality, I come with a different challenge. So the first film is as hard or easy as the third film or the fourth film. And the complexity of skills that I need to build is so great that I can never, ever achieve it in a lifetime. Now, I think this is a wonderful thing because I can guarantee you that you will never get bored, ever. And I remember when I was beginning to figure out what I wanted to do, which was actually around college, one of the reasons I came to filmmaking was I thought, okay, in my whole life I will never succeed at this. Because even if I make a beautiful picture, I will not know music perfectly. And even if I figure out this story, the next story will put me on my knees. What is the structure? What's the architecture? So it is a life work that I invite you all into making it a life work. It is not achievable, and that's a good thing. If you achieve something, we automatically get bored. We move on. So I want to talk about the first, how do we both up our skills and drop our skills? How do we get to know the self? Because if you don't know yourself, you can't know your reactions. And your reactions to people are one of your first tools. So you're going to try in your life to work on all the skills needed at different times. Some days you're going to say, okay, I need support on aesthetics. I'm going to visit the museum and I want to look at Miro, for example, because there's something in the way this painter tells me about life that relates to my new project. Another project you may say, oh my God, I need to even go into therapy because I need to understand why I get so angry at these people. Another project you may find that you want to become more present. The skills that you need to develop are endless. But some are personal and some are external, like we were talking about, like visual skills, music skills, even fundraising skills. Some are hardcore. I would say anything you can do to develop self, like meditation, to be corny therapy, anything that develops awareness is worthwhile because you are the first meeting of yourself to the world. The reason is you are the barometer. You know what? This is also, I was telling it wrong. Here we go. Okay. A barometer is what you take the temperature with outside. For pressure, right? So when I meet you, all of my reactions are the way I'm taking the temperature of the situation. The impression, everything. So in order to know whether I am a good barometer or not, I have to know myself. For example, this woman could make me very angry. I have no idea why. I meet her and the way she says her eyes, or maybe it's her blue shirt, I get really pissed off. But it could be, if I know myself, I know that the color blue makes me really angry because my mother wore it when she got pissed off at me when I was a little kid. And I can actually mitigate this. I can realize that my anger might not be about her, but might be about myself. Or perhaps it's that someone with a certain attitude makes me angry. So knowing my emotion, rather than acting on it, I could actually say, okay, that's that attitude. I'm using myself as a kind of litmus test to judge the world, but in a very wide way. Does that make sense to you? You are using your perceptions not just on the money as we speak, not just, I'm angry, she's a bad person, but in a very deep way. Also, when you love someone, love is a dangerous emotion. We fall in love with our film subjects. Big problem. Love is wonderful. You want to, of course, love the people you're involved with, but I guarantee you making a film is an exercise in unpacking that love. Why do you love them? Maybe you love them for very complex reasons that are not entirely clear to you in the beginning. Maybe those reasons dissolve over time and you begin to realize that there's a lot more depth there. So investigating self and other is very important. Now, to do that, we again have to start with some very simple tools. The first thing we have to do to work with the world is to show up. And as I started this conversation, showing up is a very difficult thing. Somebody, for example, to show up while you're texting, as someone here in the room is, while you're reading a book, while you're taking notes, while you're holding a camera, while you're thinking about the argument you had with your partner last night, it's a hard thing. But if we don't show up, we cannot perceive. So I'd like to invite you all to do a little exercise with me now. Is that okay? You ready? So we're going to do a very American New Age exercise. Okay. So close your eyes. Everybody close their eyes. Now being here means that you feel that you are present. You feel your seat on the chair or your feet on the floor. You hear my voice, the buzz of the room. If you have a thought, just try to drop it and come back to the feeling of being here. It's a physical feeling. Your feet on the floor, the sound of my voice. Bring yourself into the room. Again, if you have thoughts, just let them go for a minute. And say, okay, let me bring myself back. Be here now. If your hands are touching, what do they feel like when they're touching? What does the air feel like on your face? Really being here. Now, I'd like you to think of something that happened to you yesterday. Keeping your eyes closed, just think back, first thought, best thought. An event, a conversation, a scene that happened to you yesterday. Try to see it in all detail, hear it, if there's any feelings involved with it. Now slowly, keeping your eyes closed, I'd like you to bring yourself back to the room. Let go of that memory, that short-term memory, and pull yourself back in the room. The feeling of your feet on the floor. The sound of my voice. The buzz of the room. Just really be here. Even if you want to stay back there, pull yourself into the room. The sound of the voices downstairs. The feeling of your body in the chair. Now I'd like you to think back to something that happened to you as a child. First thought, best thought, can be any memory, image, scene, conversation. And I'd like you to really remember it in detail. Okay, now pull yourself from that memory and come back to the room. Maybe sometimes it's hard, just let it go and feel your feet on the floor, your body in the chair, the sound of my voice. Bring yourself back. The sound of the phone. The air. If thoughts come up, just let them go. Okay, now you can open your eyes. So what did you notice?
It's harder to come back. It's harder to come back.
Harder to come back where? To the room. The memories are easier to stay in. Interesting. It's easier to stay in our memories than to be in the room. What else?
Feel relaxed.
You feel relaxed.
I say it was some sort of order in the chaos because you stop us from the multitasking and put us to one task. And
So it's limiting the chaos. Yeah. What else? Somewhere in this part of the room, I'm not hearing anything.
Thinking about the future. I started to say, I did the same. I guess I would have.
No, we hear you better.
I was thinking about the future. When we realize what we are doing in the present, it's important for future, for the next step what we do.
Absolutely.
Was the first thing.
And how was it just to be present for you?
I was starting to cry.
You were starting to cry. Do you know why?
I feel pressure in my voice.
Okay. You know, probably I thank you for telling us that. She's probably starting to cry because it's the first time she's let herself feel what she feels now. And often we do a whole lot of dancing to get out of our present feeling. So that's a place for you to investigate when you go home. What is in the present that's making you sad? What else?
Experience. Interesting experience.
Okay, why are
We should try to do this more often.
Yeah. I think we should try to do this more often. I think this is not working. Just went off. Can you hear me? Did I press it?
Yeah.
Oh. Why it's interesting. Again, we started off by talking about skills. It is fine for you to have memories, to be informed by the past, by what happened yesterday, but it's very important to develop the skill about being present as a really clear skill. Why? Because if we're not present, we can't begin to perceive the other. It is only with our presence that we can perceive truly. Otherwise, I'm in my head thinking about other things and sort of vaguely in your company. There is something else. We are operating in what's called a unified field. A unified field means that, and this is in quantum physics, we are all in this room affecting each other at the time. Every time somebody leaves the room changes, and every time somebody comes into the room changes. It's why in an environment like this, it's very hard to have a private conversation, because the field is literally changing every few minutes because people are walking in and out. But if I show up when I meet somebody, I'm telling you, my presence will pull them forward. And it's more likely that they will be present. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Do you practice TM?
Do I practice TM? No. But I do meditate. So he asked, do I practice transcendental meditation? No, I don't.
Falun Gong?
What?
Falun Gong?
No. So the whole thing is that using ourselves as a tool, we are going to create a field of presence. And we're going to pull our subjects to be present. Why do we want them to be present in front of the camera? Because their presence is where the truth is also in their lives. When we turn on the news, etc., we see a whole lot of distracted people. They're going to tell you about their lives, right? They say, oh, let me tell you what happened. Well, a tree just fell on my mother's house. 3 people died, and they go on like this in a very distracted way. When we make films, we want people to show up and be present so their real truth is on camera. Does that make sense? Is there any questions about that? Does anybody not understand that? Films, good films, great films, are when people are showing up when their lives on camera. Films that are mediocre, the news, is when people are representing or acting in their lives. And real people are very bad actors. in order to demonstrate something. What we try to capture on film is reality, is truth. Now we have something very complex here, which is called a camera. Now I need somebody to hold the microphone for me. I'm going to be a mic holder. So here we have this thing called a camera. This, as we discussed, quite a big camera. And we have this second problem or possibility, which is that the camera is also affecting, and it's now on, by the way. I'm going to prove it to you. The camera is now affecting the room. So in the room with our presence, the camera is now affecting this field. How did the room change?
The filmmaker really needs to be stronger than the camera in this position.
Ah, that's interesting. The filmmaker
camera
needs
is only an object, while
right.
there are two people present, human beings.
So it's a matter of trust. And do you trust me?
Now that I came here and I know who you are and I'm actually here, yes, I do. My level of trust has increased.
Yeah, it looks a little bit like she trusts me. No, I mean, I'm serious. You can't see, but it does look like she trusts me a little bit.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
You said you believe that we're subjects now. Do you feel objectified?
Yes, I do now understand.
Yeah. You feel that you're an object because I have the power, maybe? It's an interaction of power.
Yes, but I believe I'm more powerful than the camera. Because
Okay.
I am the subject.
You feel more powerful. I think, though, many people do feel less powerful. So it's an interesting question. The issue of power.
The camera is only, I don't know how to say it. It's just a way to communicate. I am the communicator.
Okay, exactly. He
Also,
feels.
you are the communicator.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I noticed something about people in front of the camera. I think we're very, most of us are afraid of the camera because of what the news does to manipulate. And I think they're afraid of that. They don't know what exactly others can do with the images and
Right.
cut them in order to say something else. And well, I think that's what happened to me when I was trying to film something, and they said no because you're from the news. And
Right. So also people have direct experience. Was there an arm up here?
It's on. Okay. Can you hear me now? I've noticed something as well. When I just have a regular phone camera, and I film my family sometimes, and many people in my family, maybe it's a problem with my family, I don't know, but they say they do not recognize their voices. My mom is one of those people. I am one of those people as well. And they say, did you do something with the material?
Right.
Have you changed something? And I'm like, no, that's your voice. That's really your voice.
Right.
And it's not that they like it better, but worse.
Right.
So that's interesting to me. I don't know if it's something that's very often, or as I said, just with my family. Okay.
I think, let me come to that in 1 sec. I just want to say something. Notice I'm filming myself now. One of the things that we don't do enough as filmmakers is to experience what we're asking other people to do, which is to show up and be present with a camera. So I would highly recommend, we're going to pass this camera around while we continue. I will come to your point. I want you to try filming yourself like this. How do you feel? How can you be present with the camera now that we have some language around presence? I want you to feel, what does the camera do to you when you hold it? Because FYI, a camera doesn't only affect the people it's shooting, it also affects the people who are holding it. When I pick up this camera, I show up more. That's very important. So if I'm a filmmaker, I can use the camera to show up and be present and not be distracted. And how does it feel when you're pointing it? So let's just pass it. This is on.
Don't drop it.
Don't drop it. It's a very... I happen to be very muscular, but it's a very heavy camera to do this with. But
Should be
you
passed on the other one, the little one.
Well, I also wanted, we can do both cameras. Take this. We have this little camera. I wanted to ask you a big question, which is, does this camera, yeah, that's great, but then you have to see. Okay, so you're trying 3 positions, self, filming someone else, and just the feeling of holding it. And I want you to take enough time to feel it. So does this camera, by the way, feel any different? Let me just turn it on.
No, it's okay. You turn it on.
You turn it on there. Okay, this camera is now running. Does this camera feel different than that camera?
It's a little bit smaller.
What?
It's more casual.
Less intimidating.
Exactly, yeah.
Does it make a difference? It doesn't to you? All the cameras, yeah.
It's
You guys, does-
more amateur.
Does this camera make a difference? Is this easier? It's more familiar. You don't think it doesn't have the same impact maybe.
I think it's worse because there's a perception that because it's smaller, the final picture will be of worse quality, so
Right.
that the individuals will look bad.
Oh, okay.
So I think
So he think it could be worse. So, you know that big camera, I'm going to pass this one on this side. So the same idea, use it in 3 positions. So you're going to hold it, film yourself, and I want you to also feel what it feels like to hold the camera. We don't take enough time to say, what is this tool that is one of our second tool after ourselves? What is it doing to the scene? Now, when we get to this tool, thank you. Thank you. When we get to this tool, we had some interesting comment over here that when, what's your name, sorry? Did you make the comment about your family doesn't recognize their voice? What's your name?
Delia?
Delia? Yeah.
Delia?
Delia, okay. The camera has a lot of possibilities of what it can do. But one of the things the camera does that I think is a very positive thing is that it can reflect the truth. The camera can also be a way to distract, and it can also tell lies. So there are several options with the camera. The camera isn't only a tool of reflection. But in the case of Delia's family, it's interesting that they didn't recognize their own voice or image.
It's a conflict between the image we have on ourselves and the image the camera.
Why the camera can be so powerful is it can be the ultimate mirror. I think that one of the reasons why people do allow themselves actually to be filmed is because they're looking for some kind of reflection. The subjects, as well as the filmmaker, are looking to understand their self and their world. And in a best case, the camera sometimes can tell them what they cannot see or hear. So even though her family didn't recognize their voice, it's interesting that listening to the recording may tell them something new about themselves. And I find that very interesting. Many of you know that I made a film called Flying Confessions of a Free Woman, which is showing 2 hours out of 6. It's showing tomorrow night. And one of the things I did with that film was to use the camera on myself, precisely because I wasn't able to have an image of what my life looked like. So the camera can reflect the truth when used with a good operator. I mean, as you said, it all depends on who's behind that camera. Anyway, I hope very strongly that all of you go home and take out your flip cameras and start experiencing the effect of the camera on you, on yourself, and on subjects. Because if we're going to use this tool, we better become aware so that we can work with it properly. I can say that I have found, although, you know, I live in America where there are tons of filmmakers, there's tons of news, I have found that often people want to have films made about them. Again, because of this need for reflection. Also, people often want films made because they want their values perpetrated in the world. So they want to express their values in the world. But in fact, a lot of times a camera can actually give something that is positive. There are two possibilities. It can give something or it can steal something. And hopefully we're going to find a way to make the camera give something. I think even the concept of 15 minutes of fame comes out of a need that we can respect in people. It's not all negative. How do I make sense of my life? How do I make my life matter? How do I matter in a world that is complex?
You give them a voice.
You give them a voice. Exactly. So given that, now we come back to us as filmmakers. Okay, this is a very intense masterclass for me, but trying to really go through many things is, given that we're giving people a voice, how do we know what to say about them in their lives? This is very complicated because life is very complex and there are multiple stories going on at any given moment. How do we understand that? Okay, we can say, we're going to tell you a story about this masterclass at Orange. But at the same time, we could tell you a story about Romania on March 15th today?
Yeah.
On March 15th. At the same time, we could go into any one of your private stories and tell probably 20 stories. So at any given moment, there are parallel narratives going on. So let's say, for example, we're going to make a film about the film festival. About Alexandra's Film Festival, let's just say for the moment. How do we choose to tell that story? Do we tell it about the Masterclass of Jennifer Fox at Orange between 12 and 12 o'clock? Do we tell it about 30 filmmakers? Do we tell it about Romania? Do we make it a personal portrait of Alex and his family while they struggle to keep up with his busy schedule during the festival? Do we tell it about the protest outside on the street while the festival's happening? Maybe it's a story about the guy who made the popcorn on March 16th. Do you see how many stories are running? So if life is so complex and we as filmmakers are presented with all these choices, again, what makes a film is the choice you make. I'm going to choose maybe to make it about Alex's family during the festival as a reflection of the struggle to put on film festivals in a world that doesn't appreciate art. Or I might say I'm going to make it about Romania, that in the middle of a very politically troubled period where people are protesting on the street and want the president ousted, they're still able to have a documentary film festival. Or I could say I'm going to make it about this woman sitting here with the glasses and her hand there. And when she goes home at night, what she tells her partner or her mother about the Masterclass and how that affects them. There's a million stories. Or I might make a love story. Here's a love story going on right here. In the middle of the festival, two people are in love. It's important. So there's all sorts of frames that we get to choose from in any given moment. How about people like me who make films that are shot over 20 years? I filmed 20 years and shot more than 1,000 hours of my most recent film. The one that's showing Saturday called My Reincarnation. People say, oh, you shot 1,000 hours, that's so much. But 1,000 hours is nothing of 20 years of two people's life. It's a minuscule representation. How did I choose what to film? And out of that 1,000 hours, how do I choose what goes in the 90 minutes? So this is where this whole idea of presence and making decisions. Thank you. We are constantly looking to show up in front of our stories, to evaluate, to look for structure, architecture, for the surface and the depth. And we're trying to make choices or preferences based on us, our perception, and the story in front of us. So, I'm going to give you some examples of some preferences I made to make it clear. But out of you and your story, you come up with a thesis or a central notion. It can also be a central question. And that central question or thesis is going to tell you everything you need to do for your film. It's going to tell you what to shoot. It's going to tell you how long to shoot. What or who to shoot. How long to shoot. Where to shoot. What the distribution is going to be for that film. Even the fundraising, it will tell you, by the way. Everything will come from this central notion. People often say, oh, I'm making a story about X. What should I do? And I say to them, well, what is X? X should speak to you. The central story should speak to you and begin to define what you can do. So now I'm going to give you some examples because this is a little theoretical. So this is towards the very beginning of the film, it's just a small section of the film that also, what I want you to see is that the story also defines the language that the film will be shot in. You can't turn the lights off?
We're trying.
Years ago. There's five of us now. My mother and me, my two older sisters, Muna the eldest, then Naila, and my younger brother Fadi. And then there's me, Gabby. I can't believe it. I thought the war would have finally changed this place, that we're going to eat on time again. It's just like Daddy and Granny would have wanted.
Moi j'étais là, je me suis approché pour goûter le gâteau, il n'y avait plus que les traces du bar. Yo-yo, elle est arrivée il y a une semaine.
As children, we were raised on it.
And I used to go to sleep this way, to the east this way, you know, put my legs there.
How was it shot? What do you notice about the characters?
Their social status,
Their social status, but
a certain tradition.
tradition. What? Pressure, nervousness. What else? What about the style of the film?
It shows a ritual.
What?
It shows ritual.
The ritual.
of preparing food.
Yeah. What did you say, sorry?
It's fresh. I don't know. I like it. It's very live.
Very fresh. It's actually, this is a film that I would say, because of the house, and it's a film about the destruction of a house and a way of life, and beauty, we would say. I would say that we chose a very beautiful kind of film language, a very aesthetic, very formal. Did you notice that? It's also a language of objects, of details, because it is a world of objects. So when we were thinking of the film, we were thinking what language would best express this family.
Material values.
Material values, objects, details, etc. It's very Chekhovian. The son gets married at the end in a big wedding, etc. But as we're working with the idea of the film, we start unpacking it like this. And my boards are full of diagrams like this. What does the house mean? How do we represent it? How do we show it on film? What is the story about? Anything else you notice? In this clip, you don't see the war, but the war is all around them. It's a little bit like an island. You will see it very strongly in the film.
That was like the impression that you wouldn't know there's a war, except maybe from the newspaper scene, which is very, very short. It might give you a hint, and maybe some of the conversation I didn't hear because the sound wasn't so good. But otherwise,
you would know there was a war. Yeah. If you see the film, though, you will see the war is all around them. But the film is very much about how the war impacts and doesn't impact them. Also, so language. We thought this film, does it strike you like television? Does it strike you like cinema? Cinema. So we thought this film should look like cinema or like fiction. It's in fact a film that did a huge cinema release at the time, internationally as well as in America, because it looks so much like cinema. But the fact that it looks like that isn't accidental. It's because the very notion of the film is trying to express the destruction of beauty, of a way of life, and without this kind of aesthetic, we wouldn't express the film. I highly recommend you guys see the film tonight because, not just because I made it, that's not it. It is actually a really good example of a film that had a very strong thesis that is expressed through the unpeeling of a family. And the thesis is about the seduction of destruction and how this family actually becomes caught up in the war because of what it gives to them. It's a very unusual film. Like all films, they can only happen once. I can never imagine.
It has the
Chekhovian, yeah. Now, this film, Beirut, that's showing tonight, is a film that I really knew the whole story from the get-go. But films come to you differently, and I don't want you to think you have to know everything before you start. I've had films come to me in a completely opposite way. So with Beirut, it's called Beirut, the Last Home Movie. I knew the subjects, the story, and the thesis very early, and then went to Beirut, to the location, and saw that did it exist? Yes. And I began to film it. With the next film that I'm going to show you, which is a clip from Flying, which is showing tomorrow night, it's called Flying Confessions of a Free Woman.
It has to do with the hero flying of Erika Yon to the title.
It's a kind of riff on it, yeah, absolutely. This film, I did not know the story, and I didn't know the subjects of it. So what we call casting Even though the problem with documentary is there's no language. When I use the language from fiction, we cast subjects. Sometimes with flying, I had a thesis, but I had no story and I had no cast. And the thesis was trying to make a film about the way women speak when men aren't around. The thesis was that there is a secret language of women. Women, do you know what I'm talking about? Yes, okay. Okay, but the question is, how do you make a film about a secret language? We had a couple problems. The camera would totally ruin the secret language. And the other problem is, who should be in this story? How many women? So I went even further. My thesis became, there is a secret language of women that is universal and beyond caste, class, and culture. And that led to this very large project. At the very end of it, I thought, oh, but how can I make a film about 60 women? And how can I pretend I'm not a woman? So I put myself in the film. But myself as narrator and protagonist was the end of the line. It was not the first thought. The thesis was what drove everything. Does that make sense? In this case, it was all there at once. I had a complete story. In this case, I only had a thesis, and I had to find the story and the cast to imagine it.
You didn't start with the idea of making a movie about yourself.
I did not start with a film, and I did make a film about myself. The other reason I thought I had to put myself in it was I realized I was actually in a kind of crisis as a woman. And a crisis makes for a good protagonist. Because a crisis makes you go beyond the problem of that camera. You will go beyond the camera because you need it. I needed a reflection, as I already... Okay, the last piece that I want to say. So from my thesis, I found a cast, me, and my friends, and my family, and strangers. That was my cast. But I had a problem. The film is about the language of women, and I thought the camera would collapse it. So I had to develop a way to use the camera in which the camera wouldn't impinge on the intimacy. And so we developed this idea of passing the camera in conversation. And then we tested it. So we also developed a language. If you remember, Beirut had a language that was very much like fiction. This film had a language of passing the camera. And by the way, I never met those women before. I was staying with Paramita, the heavyset woman, but I had only just met her. It was a completely new friend. And one of the things about passing the camera is by giving away the power immediately and saying, oh, you film me, it builds very quick relationships.
It's very democratic.
Very democratic. And suddenly the people realize, oh, I can do this. And of course, if you see the film, I'm quite open in it as well. So I'm using myself as a very open voice to engage their openness. You always say, there is no magic here. What is my central hypothesis or story? And from that, you determine the language that you're shooting. It's not very complicated in that sense. Getting to this can be hard. But here, passing the camera was a way to fulfill the hypothesis, but also we are preferencing intimacy above everything. This film preferences intimacy above aesthetics. Beirut preferences aesthetics above everything. Because the aesthetics is inherent to the story. It's the destruction of beauty. It's the bringing on of chaos. Do you see, it's very simple concepts. However, I don't know whether it's me, but I feel there's a change in the scene, that it isn't just about for me, but it could be I'm in it, that I feel also it turns the concept of freedom on its head. Because at the end, they're laughing at me for my crazy ideas. And I think that does rule. It isn't just we think they're poor Indian women who don't masturbate. We kind of, at least I wondered in the scene, maybe it's the opposite. If you go on, you're going to see Paramita give me a lecture about love, in which she says, you don't know anything about love, do you? And in fact, she was right. So I hope that the passing also turns it on its head a bit and makes an even ground. Again, because the thesis or hypothesis was that it goes beyond that the way women speak. Thank you. That it goes beyond class and culture. And I think the film, if you see it, makes a very good case for that. If you see the film, though, the title is Confessions of a Free Woman, and you'll see that that's very much a little bit of a joke. That in fact, if I'm supposed to be the free woman, I am not very free. So it's a little ironic in that sense. Now, coming back to films, I want to just show you one more clip, which is the third film that will be here today, here this week, which is a film called My Reincarnation. And again, just to prove that no film is the same, My Reincarnation has a totally different development. The film, as I've said a few times, is shot over 20 years. And the only thing I had for the film was I had actually a subject and I had access. But I did not have any story for 17 years. So I had the subject being my personal Buddhist teacher, who is the father in this film, and I had excellent, amazing access to him. And for 17 years, nothing happened. And so it's a... Yes, and?
How come nothing happened for 17 years?
Because, by definition, a Buddhist teacher doesn't have a very dramatic life. It's really a problem. Now, the question is also, well, why do you care? You can make a great film about a Buddhist teacher without a narrative. You can. However, one of my goals for this film was that I wanted to make a film for a general audience. And one of the things we didn't talk about is why story is so important and narrative for speaking to a general audience. If I only wanted to make a film for Buddhists, I don't really need a story because they're able to watch hundreds of hours of a spiritual teacher teaching. But for non-believers, we need a narrative that is recognizable, meaning a recognizable human frame to place this in. And that's why I was waiting for a story. Now, another filmmaker could have made a beautiful Buddhist film, maybe in an experimental way, maybe in a non-narrative way. But again, when I said it's you plus your subject, I happen to be a very narrative filmmaker. And so story is what interests me. So I personally was waiting for a story. 17 years into the filming with no story and maybe 800, 900, 1,000 hours of footage, something happened that I didn't film. And I will now show you, this is the trailer because it's the easiest way to talk about it. At the end of the trailer, the son, who I'd also been tracking for 17 years, actually lives his calling, you would say. Only I wasn't there to shoot it. So classically, as would have it in most documentaries, the most important scene the filmmaker did not shoot. Luckily, in a modern world, his brother-in-law had a camera. So the whole film that exists now, that's playing internationally, that's just been in 55 cities in America theatrically, that's doing very amazing outreach in the world and going around the world. The crux of it happened on an event that actually was not my filming. We were then able to go back and build this whole film around this climax. So here is the trailer, just so you can see it, and we can talk about that.
We don't have a real emotional relation, me and my son. He always treats me like the son of a master, not a father and son of any Italian family.
Very important that in India, the same, my son is the incarnation of my uncle.
Everybody says, yes, I like to be an incarnation, but I don't like to be not myself.
The scene that is about to happen in the film where he goes to Tibet and is enthroned in the monastery, which you will see if you watch the film on Saturday night, is all shot by the brother-in-law, not me. And only when we had that scene, and I actually kept filming the father and son for 2 years after that, only when we had that scene did we have a film. And so I just am using it as a really good example that films come in very strange ways, and there isn't a right way to approach a film. The film was always about the same thing, which is it's sort of the intimate story, the intimate unseen story of a high master. And it is still that, but we didn't have the story part. So what you're going to see in this film is what you never see, which is the private life of a high religious leader. Never seen, probably never will see again, because the access which I had was quite incredible. But I was waiting for the component of story to manifest. Even though I was already tracking the son, I didn't really have a conclusion that would allow me to tell his story.
The beginning.
What was my expectations of this film? You know, this film was actually started after I finished the Beirut film. And Beirut was a very hard film for me as well. It was my first film, and I really did not know how to make a film. So it was a huge learning experience for me. But the film Beirut was quite successful. It won Sundance. It did an international film distribution. It went to Berlin. Afterwards, I was burnt out, and I actually dropped out to travel with this teacher as a secretary. And I had this incredible access, and I just thought, oh, I have this access, I should film him. So in the beginning, I didn't have much expectations. And then I met his son, and I heard the story that the son was supposed to be the reincarnation of the father's uncle, who was a great master. And I thought, oh, that would make a great film. But the son said, forget it, I'm never going to become that. And I believed him. So I just kept filming because he was my teacher, really. And in this case, I was really driven by a really heavy sense of responsibility to him and to the message of spirituality, I guess, and to the Buddhist teachings. So we started with art comes out of need. So, I mean, in the case of my work, these are 3 out of 4 of my work. Every film was motivated by a different need. In this case, it was more a sense of fulfilling responsibility, which was a really big thing for me. The people never asked me to film them, but I felt a responsibility as a filmmaker with this access to do something. 20 years later, we finally made a film, but it was really hard. So I think we need to wrap up, but can I just open to general questions? Because we've gone through a huge speedboat through a lot of different concepts. I hope you take some of them home with you. Experiment with the camera. Be aware of presence. Learn how to make presence as a tool in your toolbox. I have to say, when I approach my subjects, I do a visualization that I put my ego on the floor. I try to separate and put aside what happened the night before, my fight with my boyfriend or whatever, and I try to show up and really be present. My experience is that the camera can help you be present. I happen to shoot my own work, so it helps. But if you don't shoot your own work, you have to use other tricks to show up. The other thing, just in synopsis, is to let your story tell you what to do. Or your thesis should motivate you what to do. In the case of flying, my thesis took a long time to unpack, but gave me characters and a story.